Coming at you a little bit more daily and a little bit less almost. It's the almost daily ZenCast. An audio blog talk show style podcast exploring the intersection of politics, society, and transcendent spirituality. Hello and namaste, and welcome to the show. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast, and I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Greetings and salutations to audiences around the world this Monday, December 27th. Coming at you live at 10:27 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. A sincere and genuine shout out of deep gratitude and solidarity to everyone tuning in, downloading, and listening to the show. I thought I'd start this episode with a quick rattling off of the 25 countries y'all are spread out across. Dear audience, many thanks, greetings, and salutations. Insert here your local language friendly greeting to everyone listening to the show in the following places: in Italy, Ireland, Indonesia, Spain, South Africa, Czechia, Turkey. Is that Czechia? Turkey, Poland, Philippines, Australia, Netherlands, Russia, Portugal, Brazil, Mexico, Japan, Canada, Malta, France, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Germany, the United States, and India. Hello and namaste to everyone, and deep, deep, deep waves of gratitude energy broadcasting back at you all. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and clicking on all the links and checking out all the things. Every little bit of interaction helps the cause. I want to kick off this show with some further absurdly annoying gratitude. I, as a content creator, realize in a terrifyingly deep and profound way that there are bazillions of options for you, dear listener. You can be listening to, downloading, watching, or otherwise consuming so much other content besides the humble, rough and tumble, real, raw, and radically unscripted little audio blog podcast that is this humble effort. And so for those of you that do and who enthusiastically share with your friends, the most profound gratitude. Thank you for being in on the ground floor of what will hopefully be a fast-growing community of like-minded enthusiasts of all things wild and kooky and leaning towards the esoteric and the spiritual. Mind you, I am well aware that the theme of division and conflict and heated rhetorical argumentation to the point of distraction is commonplace in most every social endeavor that humanity, that humanity is endeavoring to endeavor in. And that is, of course, including any and all things you might call spiritual communities. And I don't mean to be rude or sarcastic or lampooning. It's just my unfortunate calling to be like, hey, everybody, I'm that obnoxious guy saying we all need to chill out. Like, everybody. I don't think I'm alone. And thanks for joining me and encouraging your associates to do so as well. I am an enthusiastic amateur content creator struggling to get by in this Wild West frontier of ever-expanding techno-artistic cyber liberation, if you can call it that, to make up a term. Some people are deeply convinced, as I witnessed just this morning, vis-a-vis some social media content that flew across my streams. Some people are deeply convinced, and others are on the bandwagon to try and convince others deeply, that all technology is evil, right? And that there's this evil agenda to cyberize us. And while I haven't seen anything that definitively proves they're going to cattle herd us into some sort of Borg-like manufacturing process, of course, which that would be frightening if it were to be the case. Let's not vote for it. Right, folks? And if you don't know what I mean by that, put a big, fat, shiny red pin of whatever design and make you like. It's got to be red and bigger than average, because we got to come back to that. And things associated to that, tap into the episodes about belief. Any and all episodes where I title the show about belief, or that you catch me going on a sidebar about belief constructs, and the power therein, the power thereof, the power, to phrase it completely differently, that y'all have, which is one way or another gonna be harnessed. But I digress. Let's not vote for the most horrific of all potential horrors with our imaginations and our minds, because maybe, just maybe, that's what they, quote-unquote, want you to do. What? Wild and mysterious things come out of my mouth, dear friends, and I welcome you and join you in tuning in. This show is totally freeform, originally conceived around the concept of two or three people sitting around this awkward desk, which needs to be refeng shuied in the whole studio / spiritual workspace that I've created for myself, which has, I will admit, been woefully neglected in terms of, like, I've been weighed down by this pressure to re-feng shui everything and try to find a better working order. But yeah, this show is a rough and tumble roller coaster ride through the fractal turmoil of all the thinky thoughts in my mind. It would all flow better and make more sense if I was having a conversation with one or two people and taking turns sharing personal anecdotes and personal perspectives, as was originally envisioned. One day, folks, I have that up on my personal, individual, private vision board manifestation thingamajig in my mind. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe I need to actually make a literal actual one. I did that once, but I didn't like do much with it. It just sat there gathering dust, a bit like a year-and-a-half old calendar that's still up on the wall. But I digress. That was years and years ago. So, to get the most out of this show, if I may be so bold as to wedge in a programming note before moving forward with some deep thinky thoughts about some things that have crossed my plate in the last 48 to 72 hours, I'd like to take a moment, as I do quite often, which I think to some people's chagrin, some people might be mildly annoyed by it. But in truth, it's one of those touchstone things that arguably we as a society of societies have let slide off our collective plates. Taking a genuine moment of silence to mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and, as absurd as it may sound, literally, physically, honor all those that are suffering in this wild and wide world that we share. For there's a lot of that. Some would argue this is a place of suffering. But put a pin in that word and put it up on the corkboard and then put it right next to things Buddha talked about. Because I'm sure we've gone off on that tangent and probably posted some episodes explicitly about that. Join me right now in honoring any and all souls that are suffering by taking a moment of silence and taking a moment to turn our awareness and our consciousness inwards into that deep, dark void behind our daily personae. And I wasn't mispronouncing the word persona. I was using the ancient Greek, I think. But I digress. Turn inwards towards that silent space in between the temples of your skull. And I say this fully acknowledging that to some people this may be very foreign, especially if you're a relatively new listener. And to some people this may be very commonplace and you're like, why are you dragging it out, dude? Just take the moment of silence. But I encourage you all to not worry about any specific technique. Just allow for the intention to send that mind, spirit, emotional, and physical energy into the collective network. Setting aside, the details and perhaps the debate as to whether or not, where that idea comes from and how valid it is. Just imagine. It's what our imaginations are for. Imagine a spiritual network that connects us all, even if you feel isolated and remote and alone because you're literally out in the middle of nowhere or because of other circumstantial things. Know that deep within we can manifest through our power of imaginative visualization a long-neglected, organic, innate, safe, healing, spiritual energy network. And as kooky, new age, woo, nut job sounding as this may be, this is not in violation of any religious tenet that is, in fact, probably something long lost to most original teachings of the now over-dogmified, over-manipulated, over-distracted, organized religions. That the communion itself is this joining together in the spiritual plane, in the spiritual dimension, in the spiritual mindset, in the very spirit itself. So in this show, past, present, future episodes, I invoke this sort of thinking, this sort of mental, spiritual ritual, which I may or may not over-explain every time. But now, having heard this, you can join in more fully. So let us join in real quick, for reals now, in a brief moment of silence for all those who are suffering at any level, for any reason. And may we commune with them, the spiritual energies of healing and comfort and forgiveness. Namaste. That can be difficult, I know. It can be difficult on multiple levels. It can be difficult because it opens up our own internal awareness to our own personal suffering, and that's never fun. It opens us up, especially all those who innately and genuinely are sensitive to the communal or collective emotional tidal wave, right? Whether they identify with one of the fancy spiritual hippie new age labels about it or not, whether they think they are empaths or not. There are many people who are just slightly more intuitively, energetically connected to that torrent, that storm that rides along the emotional network, the spiritual, emotional, psychokinetic network that does indeed, I think, connect us all. And so that's the thing. I think it's why we are moved when we, as a community, either in a small scale or a large scale, take the time to honor, the tragedies and sufferings and injustices of the world. And emotionality is a complex and difficult thing. And it's something that our society our society is built around harnessing and directing certain kinds of energy flows. And whether they're overtly and consciously realizing that they're tinkering with and impacting the collective, the spiritual dimension of the species or not, that kind of energy flow ultimately does, I would argue, impact the world on many levels and in many ways, which can be a bit mind-boggling and daunting to think about. So here we are, friends, 10:45 a.m. Monday, December 27th, and I don't have a plan. I don't have a script. The hardest few moments creatively and artistically for me are the 45 minutes leading up to a live broadcast. because some days I have a plan. Some days I have, dare I even say it, because it's a dirty, ruined, laden with innuendo and taboo term. But sometimes I have my own talking points. Sometimes I even have bits of more complex thought written out, or a collection of articles or thoughts or social media ideas distilled that I want to discuss. And some days I don't. Some days I try to do all that and no shining inspiration threads the needle, and I'm just confronted with the decision of turning on the microphone and going live, despite feeling woefully unprepared, or avoiding it and just not doing it at all. And as you may have noticed, if you're a long-time listener, and hello, much love to all of you old-timers who've been around for a bit. Thank you for coming back and checking out more recent episodes. If you're such an old-timer that you've never heard of solo.to/Ministers Epo promoted on the show, sorry for all the self-promotion, but it's a thing, and I'm trying to get some traction going there. Please drop on by and visit. So what are we going to talk about today? So many things cross the mind. It is that season. That season is upon us, the season of recapping the year. You are probably inundated with top 10 lists, top 20 lists, top 100 lists of things as curated for you by your favorite media content providers across the spectrum of all the different kinds of media. And so, we could drown in that. I wrestled with the notion of doing that this year, and honestly, I'm sort of terrible at that. And I'm really more of an abstract audio blog flow thinker in terms of the show and how it works. But yeah, I thought I would perhaps, seeing as there seems to be some growing momentum and a little bit of more audience activity than earlier in the year, I thought I would ask you, dear listeners, those of you enthusiastic enough to get interactive. This show is indeed another thing from its inception. It's meant to be in part audience driven, like your comments, your questions, your concerns, etc. So a call to action, dear friends, new or old. I humbly invite you, and I think the most effective and direct way is to go directly to the source, the platform upon which I create this podcast. If you go to Spreaker.com, that's SPREAKER.com/show/ZenCast. Independent of wherever you may be getting the show originally, I humbly invite you to come on down to the official home site of the show itself and sign up on Spreaker. Make yourself a little account. It's totally free. You can log in with Facebook. You can log in with other things, I think. You can create a login with just a basic email. And then you can leave comments on the individual episodes of this podcast as you listen to them. And I think it works out best for like the analytics. I think I get better analytics out of people coming straight to the website. And I think I'm allowed to do that. I think I'm allowed to promote the website that I create this ridiculously wobbly podcast show on. And I ask not to be a burden, not to be a bore, not to get you to sign up to some other thing. They're not paying me to get you to sign up to have an audience member free profile, right? Like, I'm not getting any money from that. No one pays me to say what I say, and I think I sound like a broken record, but I think it's important to say it, bring it up occasionally, because it's very true. I used to have like a survival day job, and I was doing this as a hobby, and now I'm trying to lean into this process over this next first half of 2022 to see if we can exponentially grow the audience and actually generate enough of a monetization revenue income from the home platform that we can expand it and grow it. To that end, friends, a little bit of business here before some music, some DJ Zed lovingly crafted fresh remixes of digital entertainment asset packs from a future dimension of robot android dancing DJs, I guess. I don't know. We need to work on that log line. This show, for the purposes of surviving and expanding, is hosting or holding a fundraiser. As before, I realize that you have, as an individual audience listener, independent of your pocketbook situation, of which I will not judge one way or the other, you have many an opportunity. You have too much content to consume and too many creators to potentially support. I understand that. I honor that. And the system's got to adapt to that reality, or else it won't be sustainable, and we won't be able to be a Wild West frontier of new, whatever the 3.0 or 4.0 of the internet is going to be, and is going to, and have it be something that people can invest their time in and generate revenue, right? But I digress. That's a whole other philosophical discussion, of which there's quite a bit of debate going on, like the future, both of revenues for like industry producers, like how video game companies make their income is disrupted, to put it nicely, and radically evolving, to put it more intensely. And that's true across many industries. But the goal to the hitherto almost forgotten about fundraiser I was bringing up before playing a little bit of digital robot dance music is to sustainably invest in slightly better equipment for various technical advances, and defray all the current existing previous costs, as well as up-and-coming possible costs incurred to produce content for you, dear listeners, to consume and consider and appreciate. Not the least of which is hopefully some of the basics, because I'm sort of bootstrapping myself to a place where others already started because they had plenty of their own personal capital to invest in, right? But like the horizon I'm eyeballing is trying to get into the new immersive goggleverse of the internet, of which there's plenty of controversial discussion. But instead of buying into, here's where I stand, by the way, about any theory, political, spiritual, religious, controversial, conspiracy, or otherwise. It's a theory, so that, we got to remember that. Take that big, it's just a theory, chill pill. And until I can personally verify it, I'm going to address it intellectually with that sort of distance of, I want to understand it, I want to analyze it, I want to assess it for veracity, but it's a theory, and it is just a theory. And until phenomenological evidence confirms that it is a theory that is accurately describing phenomena, then I'm not going to muck about with buying into blind faith style and getting all foaming at the mouth about it, one way or the other. Just so that you know, right? Okay, having said all that, you can support this show by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. You can find links to the various ways you can make donations. And here, without further ado, is a little bit of our beloved DJ Zed, Escalating Incidents of Time, a peak time techno remix live production track. The universe is a wild and mysterious place. And the crazy thing is, people tend to try and minimize it and flatten it down to as two-dimensional of an object as possible. Be wary of objectification, not just of people, but of objects. Did you wiggle around in your chair? Did you get up and outright dance for a hot second? That's quite alright, folks. That's what DJ Zed's all about. That's, I think it was, right? Yeah, escalating incidents of time. Coming right back to this totally unscripted show, I thought I'd share with you a quote that this social media machine churned up from a post I made 12 years ago. Quote, "To hate injustice and stand for righteousness is a difficult thing. Furthermore, to think that being righteous is the best one can do, and to do one's utmost to be righteous, will, on the contrary, bring many mistakes. The way is in a higher place than righteousness. When seen from this standpoint, things like righteousness are rather shallow." End quote. Attributed to ancient samurai wisdom. It is my most alarming concern. I almost said alarmist, but I don't want to be accused of being an alarmist. The concern by which I am most alarmed, let us be clear, right? Language matters. Word choice matters. Not trying to be a snob. I just think that we can communicate better than we allow ourselves to. We live in a world, or so it would seem to me, after my best attempt to view it as impersonally and impartially as possible. We live in a world in which we are seduced, invited, and dare I say, downright manipulated into a form of self-righteousness. That it is a commonplace, mainstreamified, rationalized attitude to take on a form of righteousness as mental, intellectual, and for some, pseudo-spiritual armor. In a sort of confrontational attitude of it's me against the world. This is evidenced, I think, quite clearly in the political shenanigans of the last several years. The controversies, the clashes, the outrageous lack of meaningful progress. And I know that word's been dirtied, right? Like, to a certain portion of our postmodern society, progress is at best a sullied, dirty word, and at worst, the very work of the devil, which is quite wild. But beyond the problematic issue of toxic righteousness, because let us be clear, right? Akin to the problematic issue with toxic masculinity, which is, to say that is not an attack on all masculinity, just like to criticize and call out racism is not an attack on all people of the same origins as those being racist, I mean, those things are clear, right? I mean, we live in a society where those are no longer clear fundamentals of societal understanding. And there's people alarmingly whipped up with righteously massive self-righteousness. To some degree or another, the supposed Christian right, whilst waving the banner of the meek and gentle king of the sheep, right? Like shepherd and carpenter, builder and healer, forgiver and self-sacrificer, supposed Lord Almighty, which I don't know if that's actually the role of the Yeshua, not in the strictest classical sense of what that means, but that's controversial, and I don't mean to be rude. I'm not trying to offend people to which that language is comfortable. I'm just an overeager adherent, because I don't even want to use the word belief, adherent to the axiom, question everything. It tends to get me in trouble. But I do believe and stand firmly by the notion that it is a very central core part of my life calling, to question everything, right? So the irony here of our clash-oriented society is that both sides are riddled with very similar forms of toxic thinking, toxic ideology, toxic behavior, right? Not all, but let's be clear, a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. Not all men are suffering from toxic masculinity. And those who are calling out toxic masculinity are not attacking all men. Claims otherwise are manipulation. There is such a thing as a neutral expression of a characteristic. There's charisma, and there's its dark side, right? Now, some would go to a psychology label and be like, oh, the dark side of charisma is narcissism. Okay, but that's different language, and it's borrowing vocabulary from a different place. If we're talking about charisma, I want to talk about charisma that is toxic. Does that render what a narcissist behaves like? Possibly. But I don't want to get sidetracked into the definition of narcissism, because that's, to me, a different something. I'm not even sure what. A different angle, a different approach. There is, it must be said, a true and righteous forgive me. I loathe to use the same word too many times, especially when defining a word. There is a true and correct, healthy kind or form or expression of righteousness. But as with all things in this world, the dark side, the ego, whatever you want to call it, it has many names. It knows the virtues as well or not better than most of us, and knows how to seduce us from being virtuous, behaving in a virtuous fashion, into the nexus of its opposites. 11:11, things are on track, friends. So righteousness and its toxic iteration, problematic in and of itself. The fact that there's this psychological pincer maneuver of cultural, ideological dogma that, for better or worse, gets used by powerful players to manipulate and cajole and create conflict amongst the proletariat, the unwashed masses, the political bases. It's all like, what's the right analogy? I'm sometimes kind of great at analogies and other times horrible. But that's all sort of like the foam topping of a mud sandwich, right? Where it's like, it's toxic waste, soap, foam, and actual mud and garbage. Like, you don't want to eat that. And what I mean to say by that is that, as is pointed out by this samurai wisdom quote, righteousness and things akin to it, hyper-tribalistic patriotism, blind faith, religious zealotry, problematic human ego traps of toxic behavior, shaped, formed, caused by toxic ideological constructs and dogma. It's a whole spectrum of problematic issues, right? But when seen, perceived, understood from the perspective of the way, the path, the enlightenment, for lack of a better term. And let me pause here and be very, very clear for any new listeners tuning into this show, whether it's your very first episode or only your third or fourth episode that you've caught. I do not ever claim to be enlightened. People accuse me of it all the time. Let me be very clear. My life experience has led me to the unshakable personal conclusion. And I say unshakable because I don't think anyone can take this away from me. No one can browbeat me into disavowing from this. And I can't conceive of any way that anyone could intellectually disprove it. All they can claim is that they can't perceive it or that they can't believe it. Or, that's the only thing anyone can really bring to me is denial vis-a-vis lack of comprehension. But my intellectual, spiritual pursuit of questioning everything and trying on different hats and exploring experimentally has led me to a very solid, organic picture, understanding, conclusion. And I don't want to think it's a rationalization. I definitely don't. I don't accept the accusation that it's a blindly held belief. But this is the belief. It's very specific. Just to use the word belief. I hate having to do this, but let me just put it simply so that people understand without all the distractionary, discussion of what I mean that I don't believe in it. But I'm going to say that I believe something, ... but I don't believe in it as in the same way that someone who believes in an organized religion, whichever it may be. And I don't mean to draw conclusions about one being better or the other. Please see my most recent episodes over the holidays where I talk about my attitude in general, in broad strokes, about organized religion and its common ground and its problematic issues. I think I just did that on the Christmas episode, right? But for lack of a better term, I believe that the human species, being a naturally occurring fractal expression of that which is life, arguably a divine consciousness emanating and distilling itself and metamorphosizing its own fractal architecture into creating this organic womb, this organic uterus for giving forth all the various vessel forms of life, being a fractal itself, that this idea of enlightenment, setting aside all misunderstandings, misconceptions, misrepresentations, misinterpretations, and outright corruptions of it, it's a road sign, it's a symbol pointing towards a deeply mysterious, profoundly transformative, naturally occurring organic phenomena, right? And we point to it with many terms: the way, the path, the light. Enlightenment, in the strictest sense of my understanding, represents an evolutionary unfolding of the next series of modifications to be expressed through this life vessel we call the human species. This collective, intra-connected, spiritual computing organism. This vessel for divine consciousness. And it would seem as though, to stick with the holiday Christmas theme, although I'm not trying to be like a Christ exclusionary, already talked about that in the Christmas episodes a little bit. And we can talk about it more specifically in greater detail in a future episode. Put a pin in that. But if we can define a sort of general, universal, non-denominational, non-organized religion-focused, spiritual, fractal, organic consciousness, mysticism inspired by the Christ phenomena, the Christ story, as a spiritual analogy for the potential expression inherent in humanity for a divine, probably a series of, to be quite honest, because I don't know if it's one blunt on-off, you're either mortal or you're incorporeal and a glowing light being. But I'm not entirely clear on that because, as I was saying earlier, I don't claim to have achieved it. Plenty of people are running around this world claiming to have achieved enlightenment. And honestly, quite a few of those people, I think, have just unfortunately been sold a bill of goods, a bunk bill of goods. Quite a few others have had genuine and authentic life-changing epiphanies and phenomenological experience, because I think that's going on. But none of them, as of yet, have been able to practically, and by that I mean I'm using fractal, I'm conjugating fractal, right? None of them have been able to engage in the fractal unpacking of their pure crystalline light being in a sort of like tangible, oh look, it's Bob. He's discorporealized in a translucent pure light being kind of modality and hanging out. And he's stowed away his physical body, not using it. Are people capable of doing that now? I don't know. And I don't pretend to know. The way some people run around pretending to know things that they don't really know, just because they read a bunch of things that said it multiple times. Just because you read several things that said the same nonsense multiple times doesn't suddenly mean you know. Knowledge is deeper than that, right? I know gravity because no matter from what height I test it at, I will fall. And until empirical phenomenological evidence contradicts that, i.e. the only real place I know that to be true is on a vomit comet plane that zooms up and down, and you achieve escape velocity relative to the container of the plane, and so you appear to levitate. You're actually just falling, but you're just falling at a slightly different rate than the plane around you. Anyways, or actually in space travel, barring the ridiculous notion that all of that is completely fake. It's delightful that space tourism is now officially a real thing, and that within a generation will probably be generally available to all those middle class keyboard warriors that insist on clinging to any sort of the space is fake, the world is flat ideological construct. Because whatever it is, it ain't those things. And I argue that the strictly materialist globe model is incorrect also. But put a pin in that, because I've already done plenty of chats about how globe Earth versus flat Earth models are both wrong and have been incorporated into an engineered wedge issue, conflict creating treadmill of distraction. Not here to argue it, because more importantly than the shape, she is alive. She is a living womb, a uterus, a birthing canal of massive proportions and multidimensional, extraordinary architectural shape and form that boggles the mind, and therefore all we see is this. The stuff we take a big poo on and call it society. But I digress. Dear friends, 'tis the season to celebrate. And so I will wrap up this show with a bit of holiday cheer and wish you the best of whatever holiday you're celebrating. Forgive me for talking primarily from a Christ perspective. But for those of you who've been listening to the show a long time, I was raised inside, a Christian household until I broke free and explored the world's religions on my own. And am convinced, like the Onists, the Omists, or the Oneists, or the Unitarians, which is another awesome group of people trying to transform and transcend the problematic paradoxes of previous organized religious models. As Karen Armstrong says, the human animal is a spiritual creature. That may not be the accurate quote. But somewhere in her beautiful and brilliant book, which I give a genuine and totally authentic, strong recommendation of multiple thumbs up as an amateur online media critic. Like, if you've never read that book, go read it. The History of God, Karen Armstrong. As many thumbs ups as you can afford. As many stars as you can stick on the sticker. Somewhere in there, very early on, she talks about the curious pattern over time throughout history, long before the creation of any of the currently recognized organized religions. The human species has been creating and practicing spiritual practices some of which have curiously transcended the change of terminology, the change of cultural iconography, etc. But I digress. I respect and honor all organized religions and all practices as long as peace, love, and grooviness is the net result of the behavior of their adherents. As Gandhi once pointed out, I very much like your Christ. I'm not so sure about your Christians. And as a former enthusiastic card-carrying Christian, which is a metaphoric statement, not a literal one. Someone tried to tell me that I was a liar because this community or another, which I describe myself a card-carrying member of, does not issue cards. And I'm like, that's a metaphor. I know it's also a literalism, which can be for the very rare associations that do issue cards. But, oh, the silliness. Dear friends, as the year comes to a close and we take the time to reminisce, to review, to reset, and to reboot ourselves as individuals, I'm truly grateful that you are including my whimsical, wild, and unprepared, unscripted, and yet hopefully sometimes, occasionally, significant and meaningful, whimsical, thinky thoughts about all these important things. So I send to you my warmest regards and my sincerest blessings for the holiday season. Celebrate any and all holidays, and bring cheer to your family, and bring comfort and joy to those around you, and bring, in the spirit of charitable community, bring a little bit of economic stimulus to independent artists, to the extent of your ability to afford. And yes, friends, I am one of those independent content creator artist types. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry for rambling wildly out of control about all kinds of different things. And I humbly invite you to hop around, as this show is about the ideas and the experience of trying to find those intersections. Zooming in, up close, and then zooming out. So consider each jump from one show to another a step in that direction of ultimately weaving together a bigger picture than is capable of being contained in any one given episode. The best holiday cheers to you. If you are suffering out there, friends, my heart goes out to you, and I will always continue to do what I can. And to the community growing around this show, one of the goals, the long-term goals, to be sincere and honest and upfront, is to become a job creator and a charitable foundation in and of itself. Like, I want to be the kind of change I want to see in the world. And I'm trying to bootstrap myself in that direction by creating content in all kinds of different directions and trying to attract a diverse and multi-faceted audience that represents this complex and complicated world we share together. As always, I send you peace, love, and grooviness and energy. And I thank you for tuning in and being part of this discussion. Come on down to Sprecher. Make those comments direct and immediate underneath each episode so we can build a larger, more complete dialogue. And share this show with your friends. Send them on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, where they can find this and all my other content. Until next time, friends, I have been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and I've said all the outro things I can say. Here's a little bit of the classic outro music.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily ZenCast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.